making this happen. This is part 2. I'm just going to keep my eye on participants. I'll also keep my eye on the chat box to some extent. And let me just share my screen and get going.
Before you start, Chris, if everybody could, if you need the interpreter, make sure that you pin the interpreter. And also, if you could mute your microphones until you're ready to ask a question, that way we won't have a lot of feedback. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. Yes. Okay. So if you need the interpreters, make sure that you're pinning the video. I think you just find the video that you want, and then to the top right of the video, you click the 3 little dots and you go to pin video. And the ASL interpreters both have ASL interpreter in their name on the participants list. So great. All right. Without any further ado, I'll just get going. We have an hour and a half, and as I think we saw last time, an hour and a half is enough to scratch the surface and to get into some, concrete examples. But it's also we never quite have enough time to really cover everything that we want to cover. So it is ambitious to say that we're going to cover intervention and AAC, or alternative augmentative communication, in this session. We're definitely going to do a thorough run through of intervention approaches by phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of CVI. Do a little tiny bit of review and recap in case you missed last session, but this will be a much deeper dive, assuming that you already have at least an intro to CVI, what it is, as well as to the characteristic visual behaviors of CVI. And then we're going to get into AAC with the little disclaimer that itself could be a 2-hour session or even a full day session. But I will give you some important and specific tips about what kinds of considerations you should be making for your students with CVI as it relates to communication, and in particular, alternative and augmentative communication. I'll also share with you several tools and resources that I've developed, along with ones that I've developed with colleagues in each of these areas. And all of those things that I share, I've also sent to Angel and Michelle at the New Jersey Project. They can send those resources to you, or you can always just reach out directly to me. My email is at the bottom of the first slide here, and it's also at the end, at the very last slide. So if there's anything that you're looking for in terms of resources that I'll share today, feel free to reach out to me or to Angel or Michelle. We'll make sure that you have access to those. All right, so let's get going. Again, we're talking very specifically about CVI in the approach developed by Dr. Christine Roman-Lancy, which is a comprehensive approach to assessment and intervention in educational contexts, in particular for students who have cortical visual impairment. Again, all of the examples that I'm showing you, including photographs and videos, all come from either professionals or families who I've been working with over the last several years. So, I want to make sure that credit goes where it's due. All right. Last time I did share this with you, but I just want to remind you that this is a fact sheet. It's a 2-page fact sheet on cortical visual impairment that I've developed to sort of answer frequently asked questions, as well as to give you some common language for being able to explain CVI to other people who maybe are not as familiar with it. This is so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you don't have to just come up with this off the top of your head. I wanted to have some strong and reliable language for you to be able to use with anyone you're working with. So this goes through things like what is CVI, getting a shared definition, explaining how it's different from other visual impairments or ocular forms, eye-related forms of visual impairment, as well as how it's diagnosed, what the 10 characteristics are, what the 3 phases are. And then on the second page, there is a FAQ section, as well as an additional resources section. And on the document, a Word doc or PDF, there are links to each of those resources on that, as well as my own contact info. So that's there for you. And this saves us from having to do an intensive recap or review because we covered all of this last time. Okay. This is just a very brief little recap on some of the critical points that are unique about CVI. And I want to reemphasize that CVI is different from other ocular forms of visual impairment because with the right interventions, we're actually expecting children and youth with CVI of any age to make progress and neurological improvement in their visual processing. So that's different from ocular forms of visual impairment, where we're not expecting the child's vision to improve. We're expecting that the child's going to learn compensatory skills to be able to get around the fact that they have a visual impairment and succeed anyway. For these students with CVI, it's our goal to truly make progress in their visual functioning, which is exciting and unique about CVI. It has to be based on assessment. And the reason is that there are different approaches that we're using depending on where the student falls on this range of visual functioning, the CVI range, which is the assessment that was developed by Dr. Roman. Okay. Today, what we're going to go through intensively is what those different overarching approaches are in phase 1, in phase 2, and in phase 3 of CVI. Once again, intervention is a team effort, and it must be a team effort because you cannot make neurological progress with a 2 times 30-minute a week session with a TVI, a teacher of the visually impaired, teacher of students with visual impairments. It's not going to be enough if only 1 or 2 people on the team are on board with CVI interventions. It has to be everyone, and it has to be approaches that are integrated throughout the school day. And what I want to explain to you as I go through these approaches by phase is that this should not be an overwhelming intervention. It should be something that is realistic, that's achievable, that can actually happen without getting in the way of the goals that you have for the student in their educational program. It should not be a barrier or an extra expenditure of time. It should be a holistic and natural sort of organic way of integrating CVI approaches into the child's day. So I especially like to emphasize that for speech pathologists, physical therapists, occupational therapists. Whatever your role on the team is, your goals are still important, but we need to find ways to integrate CVI approaches into your activities. And you will find that when you really embrace this approach and when you really are getting it, it actually enhances the goals across domains that you are focusing on for your individual discipline or role. I'm not going to go through a review of the characteristics, but I just want to have this slide here to show you. Remember, there are 10 characteristics of CVI. We went through most of them last time. We went through color, movement, latency, visual fields, complexity being an overarching one, referring to complexity of objects, of the array, of the sensory environment, and of faces. We talked about light not just being about light gazing, but also being enhancing or attending to light, so that light actually enhances a child's ability to attend. Okay. We talked a little bit about distance viewing as being the same thing as complexity, because the further away you are from a target, the more complex the array is in front of you. And if you feel like you need a recap on any of these, I'm sharing some resources at the end that give you sort of overview reminders about each characteristic. Okay. Complexity being a really big one. Visual reflexes we talked about, and that's something that we measure, but of course we're not intervening to support visual reflexes. That's just more of like a gauge for understanding where your child or student is. We talked about visual novelty, especially in the context of faces, but also in the context of objects being novel or unfamiliar, or environments being novel or unfamiliar. Those are harder for students with CVI than familiar. And we very briefly touched on visually guided reach, which we didn't have a ton of time to get into. But the last bit I want to say about visually guided reach, we talked about making eye to object
Look away.
And looking right at something. Just making sure everybody is muted. If you're not talking, just make sure that you're muted. If you want to say something, do feel free to interrupt me or jump on the chat box. All right. So visually guided reach refers to the ability to look, whether it's directly looking or whether it's looking sort of past or through something, to regard or look while reaching and touching at the same time. So what kids with CVI tend to do is they will look and look away and reach. So they'll find it with their eyes first, with their vision first, then they'll look away while reaching, or they'll look and reach, and then as soon as they're in tactile contact with something, they'll look away because it's too much to deal with the complexity of touching and tactily exploring something and looking at the same time. Or they will feel around until they find something tactily, and then once they've found it tactily, now I can look at it. So all three are abnormal connections between reaching and looking. And just to kind of review that a little bit quickly, because we didn't, we ran out of time last time. All right. I did mention last time, and this is what we're going to go into in depth today, is the phases of severity of CVI. Okay, CVI is described in 3 phases of visual functioning, and these phases are measurements of the level of severity or impact of CVI on the child's ability to use their vision to access information throughout the day. The phases are relatively rough between on this number line, which is the CVI range. So 0 to 3 is phase 1, that would be the most severe. 3 to 7 is phase 2, or moderate, the sort of in the middle. And 7 to 10 is phase 3, or it's not necessarily severe, moderate, mild. It's more like a range of no or very little functional vision, all the way up towards closer to typical or near typical visual functioning. Now remember, there's no such thing as 0, and there's no such thing as 10. So it's everything in between 0 and 10. Everyone with CVI has some visual functioning. So it's never quite 0. And you never get rid of CVI. It's not something that ever fully resolves. So there's no such thing as 10. CVI phase is determined by assessment using the CVI range. You need to do a full comprehensive CVI range assessment in order to be certain about the phase as well as the specific numbers that you're getting on the CVI range. If it's a 5-6, if it's a 4-5, if it's a 3-4, if it's a 7, where exactly you are. And there will be some differences in how we approach intervention depending on where the student falls on this range. Intervention has to be guided by phase, okay? And what we're going to focus on today is mostly looking at what intervention appears, what intervention is like in phase 1, in phase 2, and in phase 3. And then we're going to focus in on intervention in terms of communication and AAC. Okay. Now, some disclaimers or sort of, overarching considerations for intervention approaches. We're talking about individualized.
And we're here with BuzzFeed today to play a game of Who's Who.
Dan.
Hey guys, I'm muting you if you're not muted already. All right. So individualized intervention programs based on unique goals of each phase. So we need to understand what's the goal of the phase and what is the approach toward intervention that's unique to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. But we also need to be thoughtful about the unique impact of each characteristic on the child, because color may look a little different for one student than it looks for another student. So this is a highly individualized approach, but there are overarching considerations that we can sort of qualify by phase. There is no ready-made program for CVI intervention, and I want to be really clear on that and really emphasize this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. There's no program you can buy. There's no specific materials or tools that you have to have for a child with CVI. It needs to be individualized. Strategies are misleading because you can't just plug them into any student's intervention plan. I'm going to share lots of strategies and examples of adaptations with you, but I want to give the disclaimer that I'm doing that just to give you ideas in order to generate more ideas, not so that you can take the ideas that I'm showing you and immediately apply them to your student. It will have to be individualized. So, and I want to really emphasize this because I think there are a lot of materials available online. There are a lot of resources online. If you go to Pinterest or if you go even to some of the great sites that I share with you as resources that focus on examples of adaptations. Those are fantastic and they may be really, really good examples of adaptations, but don't necessarily assume that they're going to work for your student. What will work for your student is based on the unique impact of each characteristic on your student and depending on what phase they're in. Okay. So in terms of planning activities and interventions, I'm just admitting a few more people in. Okay. In terms of planning activities and interventions, the first question you have to ask is what phase is the student in? And what we're really asking there is how does the phase that the student is in impact their use of vision in activities? Can the child use their vision in an activity? And it may be that they can't. If a child is in phase 1, they're really not using their vision in the context of functional activities throughout the day. If they're in early phase 2, they may not be either. And if not, we want to be very deliberate in maximizing their access to other sensory channels, tactile and auditory, without limiting their practicing their use of vision. But understanding that some activities are going to be too hard visually for a student with CVI, and that's okay. Consider especially activities that involve high levels of multisensory complexity or novelty. So the most complex and the most novel activities are always going to be the hardest for a child with CVI, regardless of what phase they're in. I would call those visually taxing activities, right? T-A-X-I-N-G. Taxing activities, activities that take up a lot of visual focus and energy and may or may not be accessible to a child depending on where they are on the CVI range. Okay, so let's really hone in on each phase and let's talk about phase 1 first. I'm going to talk about the goal of the phase, what it looks like in phase 1, and then I'm going to walk through examples, as many as I can give you, of CVI interventions that may be appropriate for children in phase 1. Again, with that disclaimer that these are just ideas and you have to figure out exactly what works for your child based on assessment. So in phase 1, most or really all of the CVI characteristics are impacting the child's visual functioning. So in phase 1, the goal is building visual behavior. We're just trying to get practice using vision. For children in phase 1, looking is a goal in itself. Children in phase 1 cannot look and do at the same time. So phase 1 intervention often looks way less functional than intervention in other phases. And educators, I find, have a hard time implementing phase 1 intervention because it doesn't feel like you're doing what we're supposed to be doing as educators. It doesn't feel like you're teaching anything. It feels like you are just doing sensory stimulation activities or sort of, visual stim. And that's okay. That's exactly what the child needs in phase 1. Students in phase 1 require a high level of environmental control. That means reduced background noise. It means sometimes dimming the lights. It certainly means facing the student away from bright lights or windows that are going to be distracting or overstimulating to them. And it also may mean adjusting the positioning that the child is in order to maximize their comfort and their ability to focus. And we'll look at some examples of each of those. Children in phase 1 are not able to access two-dimensional information, period. They are not able to in phase 1. So showing child information that's 2D, expecting a child to access, literacy that is 2D, print or photographs or line drawings or images in books, they're not going to be able to discriminate and process that information. That doesn't mean that they see nothing. It probably means that they see blocks of colors or shapes. So imagine showing the book, Clifford the dog, Clifford the big red dog, to a child with CVI in phase 1. It's not that the child can't see anything. It's that the child's probably seeing a big red area on the page and everything else is just too complex and very hard to process. And so in terms of expecting a child to discriminate a unique shape, it's probably not going to happen. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't show books to kids in phase 1, but they're probably going to need to access literacy auditorily, as well as maybe with some tactile supports. And I'll give you some examples of that as we go. Okay. So we still want to make adaptations. We still want to maximize visual access to literacy, communication, other modalities, but don't expect the child to visually fixate. Children in phase 1 are not able to make eye-to-object contact. Remember, we talked about eye-to-object contact, direct visual fixation, looking right at something. It's not happening until about midway through phase 2. So kids in phase 1, when they're looking at something, it's sort of an eccentric look. It's looking sort of in the direction of something, but not right at it. And I would call that a visual regard rather than a visual fixation. So just getting practice using that sort of language and terminology to describe what you're seeing. In phase 1, it's a visual regard, not a visual fixation. Okay. So that means that for a lot of activities that are visually taxing, that are not possible to use vision in, we may be considering auditory input, and we may be considering some degree of tactile adaptations. Some phase 1 intervention ideas. The lava lamp, I think, is the perfect example of a sort of go-to way of thinking about phase 1 interventions. Now, of course, you know, traditional lava lamps are probably not super safe for young children or for a school setting because they get so hot. But the characteristics and qualities of a lava lamp are kind of everything you would want in a phase 1 intervention or a phase 1 material. It has bright light, it has color, and it has movement. And when are you going to use it? In a dark, quiet room. So it's overlapping all of these characteristics of CVI and all of these things that we know to be easier for kids with CVI to be able to see. And again, it doesn't seem super functional to just sit a child in front of a lava lamp or a sensory, you know, visual sensory stimulation activity like this and just look at it. But it's exactly what a child in phase 1 needs, because we need to give them practice looking at things that are interesting in order to build the neurological responses to be able to have some stable visual behaviors. Okay. Other things like this, like those, it's like wind tunnel, wind tube things made out of shiny mylar. It's got movement, it's got color, and it has a reflective quality, right? If it's shiny, which sort of mimics light. So you see similar sort of idea. This was kind of a cool, as a reminder for kind of a cool idea that I've seen a team do before for a child who's in a wheelchair or an adapted Riften chair, to attach a flashlight to the back of the chair, right behind the student to the, you know, the top of the seat. And I'm not exactly sure how, I think you would need like a plug-in flashlight to be able to do this, but, or a lamp to be able to connect it to a switch so that the switch could turn the flashlight on to illuminate something that's in front of the child, right? So the idea is that you have backlighting, not from the side and shining the flashlight in the child's eye, not from the front, but rather from the back, and it illuminates the thing that's in front of them. Okay, that's the way you want to be thinking about illuminating objects. So flashlights to illuminate interesting objects in front of a child is good. You know, anything that is solid, bright, saturated colors has a movement quality and has a reflective or light up quality. Now, we don't want light up toys that have 100 different colors and components on them and that make lots of sound. That adds to the complexity rather than reduces it. So we want super simple, single colored objects, bright, reflective colors, and have some movement quality to them. In terms of like Christmas lights and those types of things, you want to make sure that you're going with something that's a solid block color, like these plastic tube ones, rather than the individual bulbs, which just add to the complexity again. So these can be pretty good too. You also don't want to go overboard and have like an entire room that's all sensory materials, because that becomes overstimulating as well. So it's really one thing at a time here. This was a cool idea. As I mentioned, with the flashlight with the accessible switch, this was a young girl who was able to activate, she's in phase 1. This is like a downtime vision activity. And she has a left visual field preference. So they put this kind of gold pom-pom, taped it to the wall to the left of her in her preferred visual field. They have this black board in front of her blocking off the background complexity. And she has a head switch. She doesn't have the motoric skills to be able to activate a hand switch. So she activates a head switch, which is plugged into this fan that blows air on the pom-pom and adds movement to it. So this was a cool idea because it actually gives her some agency and some control over her own CVI, vision activity, so that she can turn on and off the, the movement on the pom-pom. Okay, so innovative idea. Environmental control is critical in phase 1. Remember, we looked at this busy preschool classroom, this bright light behind this very busy shelf. It's okay if you have a busy classroom, if there are certain areas of the classroom that are busy, as long as you make sure that there are other areas of the classroom that are not busy. This is the same room, the other side of the wall, and there's a nice quiet space that doesn't have visual clutter, isn't facing a window, and has space for CVI activities, right? Just a bit of black paper on the wall. You do not need to cover the whole wall of your classroom with black paper. But if you just cover a little section, you can reduce the complexity of that section. You can set up your light box and your, whatever your CVI materials without a lot of clutter around. I think I showed you this example as well about complexity, about sensory complexity. This is in a busy preschool classroom. They just got one of these little sound walls. You can get these on Lakeshore or one of those like educational, classroom materials websites. It's great because it's bendable, so you can kind of create your own little contained space. And it's also reduces the amount of auditory information that's coming through it. And this is in an otherwise super busy classroom where they basically set up a little phase 1 activity environment. And the preschool student is behind that little setup, in this nice contained space, looking at things that are visually interesting, right? So again, it may not feel super functional doing this because it doesn't feel like what we're supposed to be doing as teachers, but it's exactly what kids in phase 1 need in order to stabilize their visual processing and be ready, moving into phase 2 to be able to do more complex activities. I want to show you a quick little video from my friend Jonathan, who's a great TVI, who's working with this young girl who's in this is like late phase 1, maybe early phase 2. And this is an app, I think it's like a $1.99 app on, for an iPad or tablet called Cause and Effect Sensory Lightbox. And you can see there's really unintrusive touch here. He's not adding to the complexity by being in physical contact with her. He's allowing her to look away and look back at her own pace. And he's using the Apple Pencil and sort of guiding just from the tip of the Apple Pencil, guiding her to be able to interact with this, very simple Lightbox app that you can choose the color background. And whenever you touch on the screen, it creates movement and bright light. And just watch kind of what her visual behaviors look like with this. So pretty straightforward. But I think what's important to notice, right, is that he's allowing her to look away. He's certainly not forcing her or prompting her to look at anything. It's a totally silent activity. We're just looking for the sake of looking. This type of intervention approach requires some patience, and you need to remind yourself not to prompt the child, not to make a lot of noise. Don't talk. Just allow the child to look and look away at her own pace. But you can see when she's looking, it's with movement, color, light, and also visual latency processing time, and in a preferred visual field. Her positioning is deliberate here with the help of the parent to set up this activity with the little pillow support so she's comfortable, and she has a left visual field preference, so that's supporting her ability to do that. I'm not really like the specialist on applications on iPad apps and technology, but there are some good lists online, especially in Paths to Literacy, pathstoliteracy.org. I think there's a couple of lists of iPad apps that are recommended depending on what phase a child is in for CVI. There's lots of good resources like that, and they're not necessarily made for kids with CVI, but they tend to be meaningful and useful. So check that out. Now, I have included, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I've included a slide for each phase, which is suggestions for the role of the TVI, the teacher of visual impairment, teacher of students with visual impairment, because I think it looks different from phase to phase. Now, I want to just make a disclaimer here that these are just my ideas. This isn't like an accepted best practice. This is just my impressions from having worked with a lot of students, a lot of TVIs, and recognize that the role of the TVI should look a little bit different from phase to phase. So in phase one, you're probably talking about doing mostly pull-out sessions, meaning that you're pulling the student out of the classroom as opposed to push-in when you're going into the classroom and working with the student in the classroom setting. In phase one, it makes sense to pull the student out of the classroom to a separate environment, or if the classroom is big enough and able to be environmentally controlled enough, to a little section or area of the classroom that's quiet, that has a controlled environment, that has limited complexity, and that you can just focus on looking at things. You also want to support the team to identify times of day for additional intervention. It's not going to be enough to just have your half-hour TVI session. There's going to have to be intervention built into the day. Now, people always ask, before I move on, people always ask, how much, how many times a day, and for how long should I be doing phase one intervention? Now, it certainly does not make sense to spend, hours of the day doing look at the bright light, look at the pom-pom, look at the, sensory toy. We don't want to interrupt the goals of the rest of the school day, but we should build that into the day in meaningful ways and at times that make sense. So during downtime, there's always, 15 minutes downtime here or there. We're not talking about an hour-long session necessarily. For a student in phase one, it might be more like 5 minutes warm up, 5 minutes really, really looking at things, and then 5 minutes sort of, warm down or cool down. And I'm not going to give you like a set number of times a day, but at least a few, right? I think it would be great to be able to say that you've planned, 4 or 5 times a day where you're just going to focus on vision for 15, 20 minutes at a time. And it shouldn't be interrupting the other things that you still need to do in the day, but it should be thoughtfully planned. And of course, the TVI's time with the student is going to be an important part of that. Now, if you're a related service provider like an OT, a PT, a speech pathologist, or so on, you're not going to be able to do this type of intervention in your, your core activity, but you may be able to do it as a little warm up, a little 5-10 minute warm up, or as a little cool down at the end of your activity, transitioning into starting to do a speech activity by just looking at some things that are interesting to look at. Okay. Phase 2. Kids in phase 2 are able to use their vision in activities, but only if they have the right adaptations and the opportunities to use their vision. Without those adaptations, it looks a lot different. Students with phase 2 look like they're not using their vision for long periods of the day if they don't get the opportunity to use their vision with meaningful and individualized adaptations. The goal in phase 2 is to integrate vision and function. So if you think about that, what that means is that kids in phase 2 are able to look and do at the same time. And our goal is to support and strengthen their ability to look simultaneously to doing anything. So this can be functional activities, it can be academic activities, it can be daily living skills, etc. But we're trying to support the student to use their vision more in the activity with the support of anchors and adaptations. And we're going to look at some examples of that. There's a major difference between early and late phase 2. Remember, we said phase 2 is 3 to 7 on the CVI range. Early phase 2 would be like 3 to 5, and late phase 2 would be 5 to 7. You could even have a mid phase 2, which is like 5. The difference is eye to object contact. Kids in early phase 2 are not making eye to object contact. They're not looking directly at something and fixating on it. They're still looking past it or through it, like some of the kids in videos we've seen. In late phase 2, the child is able to make eye to object contact, but it might be brief, it might be intermittent, it might only be if they have significant supports. The level of adaptation that we're needing throughout the day is going to depend on where the student is in this, sort of narrower 3 to 7 part of the range. If a child has eye to object contact, ability to directly fixate, which starts around 4 or 5 on the CVI range, by 5, we should be able to really see it happening. Not all the time, but at least, a decent amount. If they're showing eye to object contact, or they're, at least 5 on the CVI range, that means that they have some of the visual processing skills that are needed to discriminate and identify and recognize two-dimensional information. It means that they have a beginning ability to process 2D, whereas in phase 1, we saw they don't have that. It doesn't necessarily mean that they know what it means, what the 2D information means, but they can see it, they can process it. And then the goal becomes teaching them what it means. And we'll look at that more in depth. So the question that we should be asking for children in phase 2 is, what do I need to adapt? What needs to be visually adapted in order to elicit and sustain visual attention at targeted points in a routine? And each of those pieces is important, right? To elicit their attention, to get their attention visually, to sustain it or hold or keep their visual attention, and that it's at targeted points. We are not expecting kids in phase 2 to use their vision nonstop throughout a routine or all throughout the day. We're expecting for them to use their vision at specific, meaningful points that we are targeting and selecting for intervention. And we'll look at some of the tools that we use to be able to do that. Some of the planning tools that we use as a team in order to develop a program for intervention for kids in phase 2. Some ideas for phase 2 intervention, sometimes just containing an object in a box or in a smaller array on a tray, on a table in front of a student, as opposed to having it out in the open is enough for them to be able to look at that object. So here on the bottom right, you have a student who's looking at a bright orange, what's that, like a cushy ball? And it's easier to be able to hold visual attention on that object if it's contained in a space of a brightly colored, bucket or basket. Okay, whereas if it was just being held up, we have all the busy background array and it's harder to be able to sustain visual attention on it. Now, last time we talked about complexity and light and how sometimes kids, when they're engaged in sensory complex activities like eating, like mealtime, they're unable to look at the same time. Here we have a sort of simple phase 2 intervention putting a bright red target on the end of a spoon. And notice here that the goal is not for the child to watch the spoon or to look at the spoon. The goal is just to use vision during mealtime. So it's okay if the child's not looking at the spoon. That's too complex. It's going to be right up in his face. What we're hoping for here is that the child is using their vision during this activity. So we want to give them something bright and colorful to anchor their attention so that we're starting to integrate vision and function. It could be that the object itself in other activities is the thing that you adapt. So, you know, we're not necessarily expecting the child to use his vision while he's brushing his teeth, but maybe just to find the toothbrush and in a cup near the sink or on the holder near the sink. And how's he going to do that? The toothbrush itself is going to be a solid, bright, saturated color. Or a bowl for eating. Find the bowl, find your food on the bowl. It's not going to be about looking and watching the food. It's going to be about just finding and orienting towards the bowl. So sometimes implements or materials themselves can be bright, saturated colors. When I was a classroom teacher, I had a student with CVI who would always take off her shoes and throw them when she came into the classroom. She didn't like wearing shoes in the classroom, and she got a lot of sensory information and input through her feet because she was also had a hearing loss and was deafblind. And so we said, that's fine. You know, you have to wear your shoes when we go outside. In the classroom, you can take your shoes off, but only if you put them away in a bucket, in a basket. Then when it's time to go, we're going to get them out of that basket and we're going to put them back on. So how did we get her to be able to be more independent and participating more in that activity? We just used a bright yellow bucket or basket for her to put her shoes in. Took a little while to get independence with that, with visually modeling it. But after a while, we were seeing that she was able to visually orient towards the basket, reach and look and put her shoes in there, and also to go and get them at the end of the day. So integrating vision and function. A student using communication cards, you know, an communication exchange card system for mealtime, and the little finished basket or box that she's putting the cards into to request, I guess she's requesting pudding, is just a bright red container. Notice that the tabletop is not visually busy. It's a very simple array, and the bright color enables her to be able to integrate vision and function, right? Use vision while doing something. Now, as we move up towards, you know, late phase 2, we're looking more at using things like light, color, movement, etc., to be able to focus in on using vision for learning, using a light box to look at letters on transparent pieces of paper. The student's name started with M, so she's looking at the letter M against a backlit surface. iPads are great for this too, and I'll give you a little spiel about that in a bit. Okay, this was an example of a student's cubby, an otherwise very, very busy area of the classroom that would be too visually complex to be able to deal with. And often you see kids with CVI go over to the cubby or locker area upon arrival to school and just look away and drop their stuff. In order to get this student to be able to put her stuff on the shelf, we had just a little bright yellow tape on the shelf, on the rim of the shelf, and then also notice on the rim or on the actual hook, a bit of yellow tape wrapped around the hook. Okay. So again, using color to anchor her visual attention. I showed you this one before. This is a classic phase 2 adaptation using bright red electrical tape just around the light switch in order to be able to orient toward and find the light switch at a distance. Whereas, you know, 4 or 5 feet away, it might just blend into the background. This is similar to the exit signs that we have in a movie theater or a building, right? They're bright color, they have light, and they're very easy to see in a complex environment. This was in an older classroom, a vocational program for teenagers. And one of the jobs that the classroom had was to deliver snacks to classrooms around the school. So the student with CVI, he knew to get his snacks to deliver to other classrooms by using this bright yellow sort of, highlight or window around the shelf. And it's not that he needed that at near he was fine, but 6-7 feet away, he could see it across the room and he could go, oh, that's where it is. I'm going to go over there and get what I need. So it's an anchor for visual attention, much like the exit sign in a building. Okay. Now, intervention planning. One way to think about intervention planning in phase 2 is, and remember I said targeted points in the routine. This is a hand washing routine. We're not expecting the child with CVI in phase 2 to be using their vision throughout the entire activity. We're expecting targeted points of the activity to be visual adaptations and visual focus. So just like a task analysis, if you break down on the left side, the steps that go into the routine, and you can kind of think of them as beginning, middle, and end of a routine. But you can break it down into more discrete steps. And we don't want to adapt everything. We want to adapt meaningful points of the activity where we think it's going to be possible for that child to use her vision with just a little bit of support. So if you notice, they are not the most complex sensory parts of the activity. So at the beginning of hand washing, it's just about locating and traveling to the bathroom. So we're going to put a little bit of bright tape or mylar on the edge of the bathroom doorway. We don't need the whole door to be bright red. That's overkill. We just need a little bit of tape on the edge of the doorway so that when she's walking down the hallway, she can find it. It's like a label or a landmark. And then it's about moving to the sink, turning on the water, wetting hands. Those are complex parts of the activity, so we're not adapting those parts. It's okay if she looks away while she's wetting her hands, while she's finding the sink. But then it's going to be about reaching for and applying the soap. So now it's about locating or finding the soap. So in the middle of the activity, we're just going to use a bright green soap dispenser. And what we're expecting is that bright green, maybe we might shine a flashlight on it to get her attention. And she's going to find it because it's the bright saturated color. Okay, then she's applying the soap. It's okay if she looks away. That's a sensory complex activity. Lathering hands and then rinsing hands, probably also sensory complex. She's not going to be able to look and do that at the same time. That's okay. But in locating the towel, we're going to have a bright yellow towel. And you can see these are different colors because we're on into phase 2 now. We don't just need everything to be red. They can be different, bright, saturated, single colored objects. And then same thing for drying hands. It's okay if she looks away, but we made sure to take the time to find it visually, to find the soap dispenser, to find the towel visually. So a very simple way of planning an intervention, and you could basically continue to develop any activity that you wanted across the day to do this. That would be called a CVI schedule. So a CVI schedule, not just for phase 2, but especially important in phase 2. You have the time of the day, maybe a little description of the activity would be helpful too. If you're working as a team to create something like this. And then we're thinking about how does CVI impact the child's ability to use their vision in that activity? Once we know that, we're gonna just make a list of the adaptations that we're making in order for the child to use their vision to the degree possible during that activity. So getting off the van and traveling to the classroom, we know that the distance viewing, complexity, and light gazing are all gonna be an issue while getting off of the van, walking into the school. So we're going to use red mylar shiny material, right, to highlight specific landmarks. We're going to select a route to the class so that we always take the same predictable route. We don't take random routes that are novel and confusing. And we may also use environmental light as cues. We may also even shine a flashlight on a landmark or something like that. And then as we go on throughout the day, we're now adapting morning circle, reading, OT, PT, speech, mealtime, everything. I want to point out here that it's not just about material adaptations. It's also about the presentation of materials, like presenting things against a flat board, starting with a familiar object before showing an unfamiliar thing. Wait time is important. Using specific peripheral fields is important, and so on. Okay, so I can give you some more examples of CVI schedules if you'd like as well. If this is something that you're trying to do and you feel like you could use an example, happy to send you some examples. I put together this little tool just to help teams sort of plan an activity, and it's just a template. It's just a blank template. You write what the routine is, what targeted goals or areas you're focusing on. You've got the beginning, the middle, and the end, and you're just writing the steps that happen at the beginning, the middle, the end, what CVI characteristics are impacted, and then any adaptations, accommodations, or modifications that you're making. Fairly straightforward, but I think it helps as a conversation piece to get a team together and collaborating on this. Suggestions for the role of the TVI in phase 2. Combination of push in and pull out sessions, okay? Pushing into the classroom is important because phase 2 is all about using your vision throughout the day, right? So the role of the TVI sometimes looks a little bit more like a consult role here in phase 2, because it's important for the TVI to be able to help the rest of the team members figure out what could they be doing to adapt their activities. So it's often the TVI's role in phase 2 to support the rest of the team to figure out what they can be doing. The pull-out sessions may be more about teaching specific skills related to visual efficiency. And we'll talk about salient features in a little bit. That's a whole other area we're going to get into in a minute. Okay. So phase 3. Phase 3 intervention, remember phase 3 is 7 to close to 10. And phase 3 is all about refining the CVI characteristics. So kids in phase 3 are able to demonstrate visual curiosity. That means that they are looking around throughout the day. They're using their vision consistently throughout the day, but they may still have difficulty interpreting what it is that they're looking at. Kids in phase 3 look around. They scan the environment and they look around the room. When someone comes into the room, they turn and look at them, maybe even from 10, 15 feet away, but they may have difficulty visually processing what it is that they're looking at. And I'll give you a way to think about that, an explanation of thinking about what that might look like and mean. Kids in phase 3 can process 2D information, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they understand what they're looking at. They may need support to learn about and discriminate what they're looking at. They need adaptations to support their learning and to build a visual vocabulary, to understand what it is that they're looking at and to generalize that. Now, that is all about salient features. And you hear this term salient features or salient feature instruction a lot when you talk about kids in phase 3. It's also true for kids in late phase 2, but it's critical for kids in phase 3. A salient feature is the unique or specific part of a symbol or of an object that gives it its unique meaning and makes it identifiable. Salient features are visual features. They are not tactile features. They're not a functional feature like what is a car? A car is a thing that moves. That's not a visual feature. A visual feature would be the wheels, the mirrors, the front, the back, the unique shape of that car, and so on. So it's also been described as a critical component. So what is it that visually makes something what it is? I want to give the example of these line drawing symbols. These are Mayer-Johnson or PECS symbols, P-E-C-S, Picture Exchange Communication System. These are symbols that are often used for students with autism. And I want to talk about why these are pretty much inappropriate for students with CVI as an example. So if you look at these two symbols, right, you've got these little sort of egg-shaped faces. One is happy and one is sad, right? What would be the salient feature or the critical component that makes these distinct from each other? How do you know that the happy one means happy and that the sad one means sad. For these ones, it's all about the shape of the mouth, right? So the salient feature of these images, of these little feelings cards, is the shape of the mouth. So for a child with CVI, we may think about highlighting a salient feature with a specific color, right? So we're going to highlight the smile in yellow. We're going to highlight the frown in red, right? We might also consider taking away the sight word. If we're not expecting the child to learn the sight word, then the sight word's just there for the adults, right? It's just causing visual complexity for the child with CVI. This is still very complex. And what I want to suggest is that sight words themselves are actually visually easier to look at than these complex line drawings. So if you're doing this, you might as well do this. You might as well use sight words and outline the shape of the sight word with a color in order to anchor the child's attention to what that sight word looks like. These two look more visually distinct. These two on the right, the sight words that are highlighted or bubbled, they actually look more visually distinct than the symbols on the left. So just a consideration, when we talk about AAC, we're going to talk about that in greater depth. Now, let's look a little deeper into salient features and salient feature instruction. Now, and feel free, if you're on the chat box, to type in, what do you think are the salient features of a duck? Looking at this cartoon line drawing, picture of a duck, what are the salient visual features that make this a duck? How do you know that that's a duck? The bill. Okay, very good, right? So the bill, this shape here, right? That's something that's definitely salient and visually unique about a duck. The color maybe, right? The yellow color. The yellow color definitely tells us something about what that is. But if that was green, would you still know it was a duck? If it was blue, would you still know it was a duck? Okay, the webbed feet. Good. Okay, the webbed feet are definitely something salient. Oh, the tail, right? So it's not the entire thing, but it's this shape right here. Okay, those would be good salient features for a duck. You could kind of pick other ones from there, and that would be fine. The general shape, you might even think about this shape right here. From the neck to the tail has this nice curved shape that we can sort of always recognize as being a duck. We may also focus on the sort of rounded shape of the head. There are different ways to think about this, and there are not necessarily, right or wrong answers. But we need to be able to select salient visual features to describe what something is and to point that out for a child with CVI that are able to be generalized. So now let's look at other pictures of ducks. Now we're looking at a photograph of a mallard, right? A specific type of duck. Well, we could still use the beak, right? The beak definitely works. The webbed feet we can't really use anymore because now we're looking at a picture of a duck in water. We can't see the webbed feet. This wouldn't be the best picture to focus on for teaching a child with CVI to recognize a duck because it doesn't have access to the feet, but it also doesn't have access to the tail, right? It's cut off. Better to show a picture that shows the whole duck. So I wish that I remembered who gave me this analogy because it's one that I use frequently now, and I think it's a very good one. I can't take credit for this one, but the analogy is that CVI is like a Google image bank that doesn't have very many images in it. Now, in typical visual processing, for all of us who do not have CVI, we have thousands of images in our brain's Google image bank. So that when we search for a term, we search for the term bear, and we have thousands of images that come up immediately in our mind. So that when we see a new picture of a bear that we've never seen before, like I saw watching like a nature documentary, saw some kind of bear that I hadn't seen before. And I immediately was able to look at it and say, oh, that's a bear. Now, how was I able to do that? Because my brain fit it next to the thousands of other pictures of bears that I have seen. And it told me it fits there. That's where we classify and categorize this new thing that we're seeing. So we all have thousands of images of what bear looks like in our head. The child with CVI may not have any if they haven't seen a real bear. If they've only seen pictures or photographs of bears or a bear in a cartoon, maybe they only have one image of a bear. And it's not enough so that when they get new experiences and information that they know where to put those in that Google image bank. And this is a true story. A child who I was with CVI in late phase 2, early phase 3, who I was showing pictures of animals to, photographs of animals as part of the assessment, and try to ask, can you define what animal that is? Can you identify the animal? What is this? What is this one? How about this one? And when I showed him a picture of a bear, he said, dog. Okay. Why did he say dog? Now, if you think about it, bears actually have a shape of snout. Their nose and their snout is actually shaped pretty similar to a lot of dogs. They also have brown fur and that sort of texture that we can see, which a child may associate with the dog. They also have 4 legs. Now, a child with CVI who hasn't seen a real bear out in nature compared to a real dog out in nature isn't going to be able to look at that and think of size as a salient feature. Size is not a salient feature when you're looking at photographs. So when that child was looking at bear, this is what he maybe compared it to. He compared it to those images in his brain, in his brain's Google image bank about dog, and they're not so dissimilar. So how would we teach that child to recognize a bear? We will start with a picture of a bear. Pick a good picture that's going to allow you to focus on the salient features that you're selecting. So I'm picking this one. Now let's adapt this image. We do not need the background. That green background is overstimulating, it's distracting, and it has nothing to do with identifying a bear. So we're taking the background away. I just put it in, I don't know, Photoshop or something. You could do that in Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, or you could even just color over it with a black marker. So we're removing the busy background and we're making it not visually complex. Now we're picking a salient feature that we're going to focus on, one salient feature at a time. Now we're going to focus on ears in this case. We're not going to highlight the ears and the nose and the eyes at the same time. That's just too much complexity. One at a time. So let's focus on the ears. Now I'm going to have a script for this too. I'm going to say, this is a bear. We know it's a bear because it has these small rounded ears, or I don't know if they're kind of rounded or triangular. They're like little rounded ears at the top of his head. And there's one and there's the other one, okay? Now, can we look at other pictures of bears, photographs, line drawings, cartoons, and can we find those same features, okay? How do we know these are bears? And then we're gonna take our little drawing tool and we're gonna draw over each of these, right? Now we know it's a bear because look, it's got those little round ears at the top, the ones that we were talking about. And we're trying to give the child some skills in looking at a new thing and identifying it by categorizing it next to those other things in the Google image bank. And again, there's no like right or wrong answers, but I think this is a good one to go with. Now we could even find, you know, photographs of bears. We could find the ears on your teddy bear or on a cartoon bear or whatever. Okay, now here's an example I want to show you of that a parent made and has allowed me to share with you as well. And this is an app called, I think this is a free app or maybe $1.99 or something, called Explain Everything. Now, the parent wanted to show her daughter with CVI photographs of their vacation. They went to the beach, right? So I think they went to, you know, to Rhode Island or something. So she wanted to show her pictures of their vacation, right? To have like a family album. And she said, well, I don't want to like make the whole background black because then it's no longer a picture of our vacation. It's just, you know, not everything has to be this over intensive CVI adaptation. I want to be able to show her pictures of our vacation, and I want to point out with salient features what it is that she's looking at. So here's a picture of Leia at the beach. And I'm just going to tell you what she says for the interpreters. So I'll tell you now because I'm going to play the audio on this one. She says, "This is a picture of Leia at the beach. Her feet are in the water. Her hands are touching the water. The beach and the sand is behind her, and the water and the waves are in front of her." Okay, so very simple, very clear script. But this app, Explain Everything, it allows you to take a photograph and draw over it and record audio over it at the same time. So you can make a little clip. Okay, so here, let's watch it.
This is Leia at the beach. Her feet are in the water, and her hands are touching the water. You can see the beach along here, and the water right here.
Okay, very, very simple. Takes all of, 20 seconds to record this and make it, and highly effective. Think about having an entire photo album on your iPad or your phone even with these little videos in it, and you could actually walk through the whole vacation and talk about it. Now, because I saw that this was such a cool idea that this parent came up with and found, we applied this same exact approach to a school activity. Now, this same student in her preschool class, she was having, she was able to use her vision pretty nicely and was making lots of progress in the classroom. But the class would go out for a walk around the neighborhood, around their school in Brooklyn. They would go out for a little walk around the neighborhood. And as soon as the student got outside, it was so visually overstimulating that she wouldn't use her vision at all. And she was stressed out. She was holding on to a teacher really closely, and she wasn't looking at anything. So we took this same idea and we took pictures of things that she was going to see on her walk, a consistent walk just around the block. And we showed her those pictures and walked through the script before going on a walk, during the walk, and after the walk to give her lots of practice of knowing what she's going to look at. First, when we get out of the school, we're going to turn right and we're going to find the fence, right? So here's the fence. Let's point out the features of the fence. Once we find the fence, we're going to keep walking. We're going to see a tree, okay, at the end of the street. Now here's the tree. Let's look at it. Let's look at the trunk. Let's look at the leaves. Okay, now we're going to find the stop sign at the end of the street. There it is. There's the stop sign. It's bright red. Now we're going to turn right and we're going to find like a planter on somebody's step, and let's focus on that. So we're giving visual anchors. We're giving specific visual landmarks that we're going to focus on. And very, very helpful to be able to have it as a recording that the student can watch as a preview and as a review at the end of the activity. So you don't have to do all the work yourself. There is a website, and I'll put this link in the chat box right now. There's a website that's developed by Matt Tejan, who some of you may know, who's a TVI in Connecticut, who also teaches a class on complexity for Perkins School for the Blind. And he actually uses the class to develop this website. So the students in the class all pick an object or a thing, and they describe the salient features. And then if you click on the object, so this is a cat, it gives you suggested features, and it also gives you pictures that are already adapted. So, and we have a little script for it too. This is a cat. It has little stringy whiskers coming out from the side of its face. It has pointy triangle ears on the top of its head. It's got a long bushy tail, right? So you can, they're only suggestions, it should be individualized, but this is something like 100 different things. And a lot of them have links to actual, to actual images that are adapted. All right. So again, this is for teaching salient features. It's not like we're going to be using these types of adaptations all the time throughout the day. It's for teaching a child how to understand what it is that they're looking at. Okay. I have here some examples. These are from like a functional vision assessment I just copied and pasted that give you examples of how to use that. So here's the script, right? This is a cat, it has whiskers, etc. Now let's compare it with comparative language to something that is different from a cat. A cat is different from a dog, which has a snout shaped like this, and we're going to show the drawing. It's got these 4 paws, and it has this pointy tail. Okay. Now let's look at more pictures of cats. Can you find the long straight whiskers on the side of its face, the short pointy ears on top of its head, and the long tail? And let's look at pictures that range in complexity. Real cats, cats in different positions, a cartoon cat, a different cartoon cat, and then a real kind of complex icon, right? Which still has those same features. We're still looking at that long curvy tail. We're still looking at the pointy ears. We're still looking at the whiskers. So this is how we're going to build a child's visual image bank, their Google image bank in their brain, so that when they see a new picture of a cat that they've never seen before, they're going to be able to know where it fits in that Google image bank. If you really want to go the step further for a student who needs it, you can develop a salient feature dictionary. This is a running list, a living document basically, that are all of the different objects and visual targets that your student or child is focusing on. So this is just some examples of what that might look like. Okay, I want to keep moving because I want to spend the last 15 minutes specifically on communication. So there's some more considerations here for you. Just very quickly, we talked about sight word bubbling as a way to learn sight words for kids with CVI. There's an excellent free app here called the Roman Word Bubbling app. And it's not even an app, it's just a website actually. This is apparently was designed by and developed, it's free online, developed by a parent of a child with CVI who also happens to be a programmer for Google. So nice combination, right? You type in the word that you want, you can increase the font size, you can increase the type of font, you can have a dark background, you can change the width of the lines, to meet your own needs. You can also hide the text so that we're just looking at the shape of the word and not the word itself, which is one way to think about teaching complex sight words to kids with CVI, right? And then it also allows you, I think if you click Control, yep, then you can save the image too, right? Pretty cool. There's also, if you go to the Pediatric Cortical Visual Impairment Society website, there is a lot more information on approaches to literacy for kids with CVI with some really good examples of how to actually teach this. Recognizing a sight word in a sentence, like go here, okay? Okay, we could spend a whole lot more time on this, but I just wanted to introduce it to you. There are more considerations as you go in here, and I really want to spend a little bit of time focusing in on communication. Just going to spend the last 15 minutes on this, and then I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer and chat if anybody has questions. Okay. AAC, right? Alternative and augmentative communication. I found that and I want to give you a little bit of context before I show you a relatively new tool that I've made with a colleague to support this work. Basically, in all of my work around CVI and observing a lot of kids and working with a lot of teams, and I see, yeah, Lindsay's saying opportunity for full AAC workshop. Absolutely, I'm totally up for it. Let's do it. I'd say if we had like 2 hours, we could do a super comprehensive AAC communication workshop. I think probably working with Perkins on developing something like that pretty soon too anyway, because this is a relatively new tool. So what I was seeing as I went around working with lots of students and teams, what I could only describe as significant mismatches between communication systems and visual access. Let's talk about what that means. I was seeing on the one hand, communication that from a communication standpoint seemed appropriate, but it was visually inaccessible to the child. Or on the opposite side, I was seeing communication that was visually accessible, but inappropriate in terms of communication development. So the balance was off one way or another. For example, an eye gaze system in phase 1. An eye gaze system, right, is where you have a device, an iPad or a Tobii Dynavox is a common one, where the child who doesn't have the motoric access a child doesn't have the ability to access a device motorically by pressing a switch or finding an icon with their, with their hands and fingers, instead is using an eye gaze system, looking at it, and it's geared towards selecting it based on their gaze. Now, having an eye gaze system for a child in phase 1, I can't think of a way that would be appropriate, because a child in phase 1 is not making eye to object contact. Remember, they are not able to have visual fixation. Instead, they're just showing that visual regard. So how do you have an eye gaze system for a child in phase 1? It's not going to be accessible. On the other hand, so that would be communication that is visually inaccessible. On the other hand, a child in phase 3 who has this beautifully adapted two-dimensional iPad system, a communication device with all little icons, and they all look beautiful. 30 icons on the screen at one time. They're perfectly visually adapted with regard to complexity and color outlining of, things that very visually distinct. It looks great, but the child is currently pre-symbolic, meaning that the child doesn't know the meaning of any of those symbols. So how are you going to be able to teach a student to use a device with 30 symbols on it if none of those symbols have meaning for the child? So that's communication that's visually appropriate, but it's inappropriate in terms of communication levels, expressive communication levels. So my idea was that a balanced communication plan needs to be balanced between the student's current expressive communication level, pre-symbolic or symbolic, pre-linguistic or linguistic, and their sensory access with regard to CVI phase and characteristics and to the child's preferred learning channels. Now, we're still talking about multimodal communicators. We don't want to limit children's access to communication, but we want to scaffold what they're doing with something that fits their current level. And so a term that's often used by speech language pathologists, a robust AAC program. We still want to provide a robust AAC program receptively, meaning we're still exposing the student to language. We're still either talking to them or signing to them or modeling communication on a complex array. But we have to scaffold that with something that's closer to where they are right now in their expressive communication. And then on the sensory side, we're still talking about multisensory access. There may be tactile adaptations, there may be visual adaptations, there may also be auditory adaptations. And we're still talking about universal design and, adapting things in a way that they're accessible to everyone. Now, this is a whole other area. I think we could get into this. This would be like a lot deeper to dig. So instead, I kind of want to, well, actually, no, I don't think we should skip this. Let's talk about this. We have like 10 minutes. Let's just get through what we can. So the key question is, does the child have symbolism? Does the student have symbolism? Symbolism is the understanding that a symbol refers to an event, activity, object, or person. In order to have symbolism, you have to have a symbol. For example, the symbol for water or water bottle is going to be the cap on a water bottle. That would be a very concrete symbol, an actual part of the water bottle to refer to the referent, which is the water bottle itself. If you're just communicating using objects, right? If the water bottle itself is the object you're communicating with, that's not symbolic communication. Symbolic communication would be taking it one step away from the object itself, and now we're using a symbol, the cap, to represent the thing, so that when the child touches or looks at the symbol or gives it to you or indicates it, you can pair it and match it with the water, right? Touch the water, touch the cap if you want more water, here's the water. Now, within symbolism, we have varying levels of iconicity. Iconicity is how concrete or abstract any given symbol is. And this is a scale of very concrete to very abstract. The most concrete symbols bear a strong visual resemblance and conceptual resemblance to the thing that they represent. So the most concrete form of a symbol is an icon. It's a a part of the object or maybe a photograph of the real object, it bears a very strong visual resemblance and maybe even a tactile resemblance to the thing that is being referred to. From there, as we go more abstract, we have what's called an index. And this is why these types of symbols, these types of line drawing symbols are often not appropriate for kids with CVI because they don't necessarily bear a strong resemblance to that child's understanding of what that symbol is. So this is the Mayer-Johnson-Peck symbol for water. It's a little gray faucet, you know, shown from the side, very flat 2D image with a little handle on it. And then there's the blue stuff coming out from underneath it, and that we understand is water, right? So think about the number of concepts that you have to have and the number of images you have to have in your Google image bank in your brain in order to look at this symbol and understand it to mean water. So many abstract concepts that you have to have, yet we take this for granted. Now, the most complex symbol is a true abstract symbol. And if we look on the right side, if some of you may have guessed already, this is the molecular structure of water, right? It's H2O, it's the large oxygen molecule, and it's the two small hydrogen molecules. Now, I think we could all agree that we would never use this as a symbol for water for a child who is communicating with AAC. That would be ridiculous. It's so abstract, right? It requires so many abstract concepts. But my point is, how often do we use the one in the middle and take it for granted that it's equally abstract as the one on the right to a child who doesn't have those images in their Google image bank in their brain? They need something that's more concrete and is more relevant to their own individual experience of water. Now, of course, individual experience is relative too. Is this your child's experience with water, a water bottle? Maybe it's a specific water bottle that they always use, and that's their experience with water. Maybe it's a cup, or maybe it's a water fountain, or maybe all of these are different experiences that mean different things to the child in different contexts. So my point is that when selecting symbols, you need to recognize that iconicity, like visual novelty, is relative to individual experience. And we want to be very thoughtful about the symbols that we select and that we use for students with CVI, depending on that characteristic of novelty as well as complexity. Okay, so now I'll introduce you to the tool. And I just want to remind you, this is the little ASHA disclaimer. ASHA is the American Speech and Hearing Association, right? The professional organization for speech language pathologists and audiologists. And ASHA has a nice little statement about AAC on their website that reminds us that AAC includes all forms of communication other than oral speech that are used to express thoughts, needs, wants, and ideas. So AAC is not just about high-tech AAC. AAC is also about low tech. It's about using gestures, facial expressions. It's about waving hi as a form of AAC. I would just argue that it's not just oral speech. I would argue that sign language is not AAC. Sign language is like oral speech. It's a language, right? It's a typical form of language. So it's really anything other than sign or speech. Okay. So that's just to remind you that when we talk about AAC, we're not just talking about high-tech devices and stuff. Okay, so now I want to introduce you to this tool. Okay, this is called the AAC CVI Matrix. I created this over the period of the last year or more, probably 2 years actually, with my colleague who's the project coordinator of the Maryland Deafblind project, Jen Willis. I have a TVI background. She has a teacher of the deaf, hard of hearing background. And what this is a very extensive 33-page document that walks you through considerations for adapting communication to children with CVI, depending on what phase they are. So it starts with some, background information and resources to make sure that you have everything that you need to be able to start. some background info on CVI, some background information on communication development, and specifically the communication matrix, which is an assessment of expressive pre-linguistic communication that's appropriate for kids with visual impairments, multiple disabilities, and deafblindness. There are links to little webinar series recordings on that too. Okay, here's what we have. We have a little bit of background. We have considerations for each phase. So that's a lot of what we talked through today are general considerations for intervention by phase. Then we have the actual use of the CVI matrix. And then we have about a 7 or 8 page appendix at the end. So background stuff, it walks you through understanding this idea of the balanced communication plan. It gives you some examples here of what that might look like. Okay, there are some description about understanding communication. Here are all of the points about phase 1 intervention, phase 2 intervention, phase 3 intervention. And what we're looking for is a match between where is the child in their expressive communication and where is the child in their CVI. So I'm thinking of a student who is a concrete symbolic communicator. She uses tangible symbols, she uses photo symbols. She's not yet using abstract words, okay? And she's in late phase 2. So I'm just gonna put an X there. That's where she is. She's a concrete communicator in late phase 2. So it aligns right there. Now below, the next several pages are in-depth considerations depending on whether you're emerging, concrete, or abstract in every phase. So now that we know that this student is a concrete communicator in late phase 2, I'm just gonna go down to the section on late phase 2. Concrete communicators, and these are all of the recommendations that we might be thinking about for her down the middle. So it may look overwhelming, but that's just because all of the information that you could possibly need is here on this document. You just want to go to the section that's appropriate for your student, and there are the recommendations for the student if they are at that level in that phase. Okay, so very, very in-depth. If we do this again in depth, we could go through each of these sections. There are also considerations for sign language and protactile, haptics, or tactile input systems for each phase 2. And what I really am happy about with this document is there's an in-depth appendix which gives you explanation and resources, links to resources and examples of all of the terminology that we use. So nothing should be over anybody's head or unfamiliar to you. Any terminology that we use, we explain. So we explain what touch cues are, we explain what tangible symbols are. There's an explanation about this iconicity concept that we talked about. There's explanation of how to use tangible symbols. Examples of how tangible symbols can be adapted for kids with CVI, how calendar systems can be adapted, how gestures can be adapted, output devices. Here's the link to the sight word bubbling, in-depth explanation about hand use, and so on. There's also an end page here with even more resources for you on each of these things, and then a ton of references. Okay, so that's what it would be, is to be able to go through this in-depth consideration and look at how this applies to tangible symbols, to object schedules, right? And there's a lot more examples here. I want to conclude here with showing you a short video, just a 2-minute video, if you can just bear with me, and then we'll wrap it up. This is a student who is in mid-phase 2, have cortical visual impairment, is a concrete communicator. She's using object symbols, just like what we talked about with the water bottle cap. She's using tangible object symbols to develop some communication. And this is a short routine, short calendar routine with her speech pathologist, where they're just talking about what's going to happen next. So what we're looking at here is what are the CVI adaptations and what are the communication adaptations to this system. Okay, this is about 2 minutes long, and then I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm happy to stay on for anybody who has questions. Okay.
You do go to your schedule.
And you'll notice a lot of, typical CVI visual behaviors about looking and reaching.
Great. Like, Sarah, she's still here, but we'll do it for now. Over. Okay. Your book is all done. Hmm? Yes. Okay, Maeve. Now it's time for speech. Flip it over. Speech. And then morning meeting. And then Miss Becky, what's after morning meeting? Drink. And then drink. Okay. Yes, it's time for speech right now. Are you ready? Let's go.
Okay. So what you saw was a combination of CVI adaptations and communication modifications. The CVI adaptations include partial objects. She's not yet ready for two-dimensional at this point. She still needed 3D objects. They're very simple. They're not visually complex. There's a black backdrop to reduce the visual clutter or complexity. I really wish, as I was taking this video, I wish I had just turned my camera to the left, because what you would have seen is a very busy classroom. The choice to do this activity in this place with her back to the busy classroom itself is a CVI adaptation. You also have a red rectangle to highlight what we're doing now, the activity we're doing now. So that's using color to anchor visual attention to a specific target or concept. We also have red tape around the rim of the finished box, where she puts the symbols that are finished, because her lower visual field, remember, is much harder for kids with CVI. So the bright red in the lower visual field helps to get her visual attention to something that's in a more difficult area. Now, communication modifications, we're using concrete, tangible symbols. We're also still exposing her to language. We're not limiting her exposure to language, but we're scaffolding that with something that's very concrete at her current level to be able to start to learn symbolism. We're using visual sign with some tactile adaptations. She's got her hand on top of the teacher's hand because it helps her to be able to focus attending to the sign. There's some constant tactile support, but it's not intrusive or manipulative. There's also speech and audition because she has a cochlear implant and she has some access to speech. And wait time is very important adaptation to support her visual attention. Now, one very last thing, we want systems that grow with a child. We don't want, to think that that's the very end, that the end goal is the tangible symbols. We want systems that can grow as the child improves visually, as well as in terms of communication. So systems that can go from 3D to 2D, as well as systems that can go from pre-symbolic to symbolic, and even on into developing more complex language. So what did we do when the student no longer needed 3D images? We took photos of the 3D symbols and we started to develop them into a 2D system, first on just a communication board and then on an iPad, right? Now it's turning it into a complex AAC system. And my hope is that long-term, what she's going to be using is something more like this. We're going to start to substitute those photos of symbols for sight words. And we're using individual colors to make those sight words super concrete. We also may use for modeling something like this, a cutout window to be able to hover over or highlight over a specific symbol, to be able to point it out to her. This is much better than using a physical prompt or you know, a gestural prompt. Use a bright red window to be able to anchor the child's visual attention to the icon you want to show her. Okay, that's a wrap. I know that I'm a little bit over time. I just want to again share my email address with you. I'm happy to stay on if anybody has questions. You are welcome to have access to the slides if you want. There's a lot more here. You know, I knew we weren't going to have time for everything, but there are more examples. These are some other examples of AAC systems, as well as some considerations for different things, some examples of using, you know, other types of adaptations like stands to be able to support visual attention. And yeah, that's about it.